Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're taking a deep dive into a title that really dared to redefine a legendary franchise, a game that stands as one of the most talked about and, yeah, often controversial entries in its history, Resident Evil 6. It's a game that still sparks, intense debate among fans and critics alike, really grappling with that age-old struggle between tradition and evolution.
Indeed. And we're looking at a game that wasn't just like another major installment. It was a production of immense scale for Capcom. You can really see the ambition there, wanting to push boundaries, maybe capture a wider audience.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is precisely how it tried to balance that established beloved legacy with these, significant new directions in gameplay and narrative. And the results were often very polarizing.
Definitely. So our mission today is to dissect the comprehensive Wikipedia entry on Resident Evil 6. This isn't just a surface-level look, okay? We're going to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the insights, helping you, our listener, understand the complex layers of its, ambitious development, its sprawling, interwoven story.
Right. Its bold gameplay shifts, that fiercely divided critical reception it faced, and, its undeniably impressive long-term commercial performance.
Exactly. Think of this as your curated journey through a vast amount of information. I've sort of done the heavy lifting here. It's designed to give you a thorough understanding of this, pivotal game, and hopefully give you those aha moments that connect the dots, all without feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of details that often come with a title of this magnitude.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
So, let's get started.
Okay, diving straight into the big picture then. Resident Evil 6 was, a truly monumental entry for Capcom, not just in scope, but even in its release strategy. It first hit shelves, October 2012 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360.
That's right.
Then quickly followed by the Windows PC version in March 2013. But its journey didn't stop there, which is, quite telling about its enduring appeal, I think. This game has had a remarkable lifespan. It saw re-releases with all the downloadable content for PS4 and Xbox One in March 2016.
And it even made its way to the Nintendo Switch in October 2019. That's a pretty long tail for a game, isn't it? It suggests Capcom saw, continued value and demand there.
It absolutely does, and it speaks volumes about its commercial staying power, which is something we'll definitely dig into later. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this immense scale wasn't just about technical ambition. It really dictated a new approach, a new way of thinking about storytelling and gameplay, aiming for something truly global, almost cinematic.
Right.
The game was conceptualized very soon after Resident Evil 5's launch, which was, a huge success in its own right. And by 2009, Resident Evil 6 was in full development. The sheer undertaking was, staggering. A development staff of more than 600 people, which back then made it Capcom's largest production to date.
Wow, 600.
Yeah. That number alone tells you they were swinging for the fences. They intended to create not just another installment, but the definitive Resident Evil experience. Or so they hoped.
That level of investment is, truly staggering. Yeah. But did it necessarily translate to a cohesive experience right from the start? At its core, Resident Evil 6 is a third-person shooter developed and published by Capcom, a major installment in the series. But it landed in a very specific and quite mixed way, didn't it?
It certainly did. The initial critical reception was notably mixed, and that was a significant departure from previous mainline entries in the series, which were usually pretty well received.
Yeah, usually lauded.
Right. Early reviews often praised its technical aspects. The graphics were frequently commended. The artificial intelligence, especially for the companions, was seen as improved.
Okay.
And the updated controls were often highlighted as a step forward, more fluid. However, a significant and very vocal portion of the criticism was aimed squarely at the execution of its sprawling, interwoven campaigns.
The structure, yeah.
Yeah, the structure. And perhaps most pointedly, critics and fans alike debated its undeniable shift away from the survival horror roots of the franchise. It moved much more towards an action-oriented style, which, pleased some people but alienated a lot of others.
And yet, despite those criticisms, the game achieved robust sales, ultimately reaching an astonishing 13.8 million units by September 2024. That's a massive number, especially for a game that got such a divided reception.
Yep.
What does that dichotomy tell us about how games truly succeed in the long run?
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? It really forces us to consider that critical consensus, while it's influential, isn't always the sole determinant of a game's long-term impact. or its ability to resonate with a wide audience over time. Often, strong brand recognition, aggressive marketing, broad appeal. These things can carry a title even through mixed reviews. Resident Evil 6 tapped into this massive existing fan base, right? And its sheer action focus, even if it was divisive, it resonated with a wide segment of the market. People looking for that kind of high-octane experience, regardless of its horror label. It's a powerful lesson, I think, in the complex relationship between art and commerce in the gaming world.
So the critics were divided, but the sales, they definitely speak volumes. Now, let's turn our attention to the narrative, because this is arguably where Resident Evil 6 made its most audacious play. The game's defining structure is built around 4 distinct, interwoven campaigns, each centered on a different main character. That's an incredibly ambitious approach to storytelling, isn't it? Designed to give this truly panoramic view of a global crisis.
It really is an ambitious undertaking. What's fascinating here is that decision to tell a single overarching story, but through multiple, often converging perspectives, it gives players this, panoramic view of a global bioterror crisis, rather than just one single linear journey. And you play as a variety of iconic and new protagonists, each with their own stakes, their own motivations.
Right, like who?
Well, we have the Division of Security Operations, or DSO, Agent Leon S. Kennedy, fan favorite, obviously. His scenario often felt the most like classic Resident Evil.
Okay.
Then there's the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, BSAA, Captain Chris Redfield, another series staple. His campaign leans heavily into military action, like full-on shooter. Next, we meet the mercenary Jake Muller, and he comes with this weighty lineage of being the son of the infamous Albert Wesker.
Ah, right, Wesker's son.
Exactly, making him a central figure in the narrative's whole genetic mystery plotline. And finally, the enigmatic spy Ada Wong. Her mission often involves, uncovering the broader conspiracy from the shadows, doing her usual Ada thing.
And it's not just about the main protagonists, is it? Each of these characters, well, except for Ada sometimes, has a dedicated companion. And they play a crucial role in their journey, adding another layer of interaction, another perspective.
That's right. And that companion system was really key to the co-op experience they were pushing. In Leon's scenario, his partner is Helena Harper, a U.S. Secret Service agent with her own secrets.
Okay.
Chris is accompanied by BSAA sniper Piers Nivens, a loyal and capable soldier. Their relationship becomes really central to Chris's arc in this game. Jake teams up with DSO agent Sherry Birkin, another Raccoon City survivor, deep history in the series, making her a vital link to the franchise's past.
Sherry's back.
Yeah. These companions can be controlled by the game's AI, which was praised, actually, for being more capable than in previous games.
Better than RD5's AI.
Generally considered so, yeah. Or, importantly, by another player in local or online co-op, which really changed the dynamic, encouraged teamwork. Ada's scenario is unique, though. It can be played with or without a partner. If a second player joins her campaign, they control this sort of non-canonical character simply named Agent.
Just agents.
Just agent, yeah. And they have some interesting limitations, like they can't interact with doors or treasure chests, and they even disappear during cutscenes. It's kind of a subtle nod to their auxiliary status and Ada's typically solitary nature,
Huh, that's a weird little detail. Okay, so let's dive into the actual chronology of chaos then. Because the plot of Resident Evil 6 it's a sprawling global saga. Bioterrorist attacks, interconnected conspiracies. It all kicks off with a massive bioterrorist attack in December 2012, right?
Precisely. The story begins December 24th, 2012 in Udonia, this fictional Eastern European-themed country. Here, Jake Muller Wesker's son, remember, is fleeing local authorities during a C virus outbreak. He soon partners up with Sherry Birkin, and their mission is basically to develop a C virus vaccine using Jake's unique blood. He has antibodies.
Because he's Wesker's son.
Exactly. All while being relentlessly hunted by Ustinak, this hulking, highly resilient bioweapon sent specifically to capture Jake.
Okay, so Jake and Sherry are running from this monster. What about Chris?
Simultaneously, we see a BSAA strike team, led by Chris Redfield and Piers Nivens, deployed to eliminate the infected locals in Udonia. They get attacked by the leader of Neo Umbrella, who claims to be Ada Wong, but she's an imposter. We later find out she's Carla Radams.
The fake Ada.
The fake Ada. Carla uses this device to inject Chris's entire team with the C virus, turning them into these hideous monsters. Only Chris and Piers survive. And this trauma leads to Chris suffering profound post-traumatic amnesia. He abandons his duties, goes into self-imposed exile, just consumed by guilt.
Wow, rough start for Chris.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Jake and Sherry's BSAA extraction gets sabotaged by Carla, the fake Ada. They crash land in the mountains. And they're eventually captured by her and held for 6 long months, setting up this terrifying period of experimentation and imprisonment.
6 months. Okay, that's setting the stage for a truly brutal start. Then we fast forward to June 2013, and the action shifts dramatically to the U.S., bringing in Leon.
Right. June 29, 2013, we're in Tall Oaks, USA. The U.S. President, Adam Benford, who's haunted by the past, plans to publicly disclose the truth. The truth behind the Raccoon City incident in '98, the government's secret dealings with Umbrella. He hopes to prevent more bioterrorism.
Good luck with that in this series.
Yeah, exactly. The university venue where he's speaking is suddenly hit by another devastating C virus attack. The president himself gets infected. The only survivors are Leon S. Kennedy, who is actually a close friend of the president, and Secret Service agent Helena Harper, who blames herself for the outbreak. They are tragically forced to kill the infected president.
Leon kills the president. Wow.
Yeah. Their subsequent investigation leads them to encounter the real Ada Wong, and Leon learns that National Security Advisor Derek Simmons, a powerful figure, is affiliated with Neo Umbrella. He orchestrated the attack to silence the president. Leon and Helena then fake their deaths to go off-grid and pursue Simmons. They head to Lanshan, China, unknowingly setting themselves on a collision course with everyone else.
And this is where all the separate, intense threads start to weave together, isn't it? Lanshan, China becomes the pivotal, chaotic epicenter where these disparate narratives finally converge.
Yes, Lanshan becomes the central, chaotic meeting point for all the campaigns. It creates this truly global conflict zone. Leon and Helena are relentlessly pursuing Simmons through the city's C-virus-ridden streets, desperate for answers. Meanwhile, after those 6 months of captivity, Jake and Sherry manage this daring escape. They're determined to stop Carla Radams and secure that vaccine. And Chris, having slowly recovered from his amnesia with Piers's help, returns to duty with the BSAA, leading a new squad in the besieged city. But he's consumed by this desire for revenge against the false Ada, Carla, which leads him to make reckless decisions and, tragically, results in more casualties among his new unit.
Oh man, Chris is really going through it.
He really is. Amidst these escalating outbreaks and personal vendettas, the paths of Leon, Chris, and the real Ada intersect, leading to confrontations, tense alliances, shocking revelations about the true scope of the conspiracy. It's an incredibly dense narrative, really aiming for an epic scale where everyone's story matters to the bigger picture.
The climax of this global conspiracy must have been something else then, with so many characters involved, such high stakes. How did Capcom manage to wrap up such a sprawling plot?
It was indeed a monumental task. Each campaign reaches its own dramatic conclusion while still contributing to the overall resolution. Leon and Helena finally defeat the increasingly mutated Derek Simmons. His transformations get more and more grotesque as he succumbs to the C-virus and his own desperation.
Classic Resident Evil boss mutations.
Exactly. Simultaneously, Chris and Piers undertake this daring rescue of Jake and Sherry from an underwater facility where Carla was holding them. This leads to a dramatic confrontation with a massive, terrifying bioweapon called Haos, which is literally designed to flood the world with the C-virus.
Oh, great. Another world-ending BOW.
Yep. Piers gets severely injured during the fight and makes a heroic sacrifice. He injects himself with the C-virus to gain the power needed to destroy Haos. Then he forces Chris into an escape pod, uses his mutated abilities to destroy the entire facility, ensuring the threat is neutralized, but at the cost of his own life.
Wow, Piers.
Meanwhile, Jake and Sherry, having also escaped, face their final confrontation with Ustanak. They finally defeat the big guy as they ride this rocket-powered lift to the surface. It's a very cinematic sequence.
Sounds like it.
The imposter Ada, Carla Radams, revealed to be this brilliant scientist, forcibly transformed into an Ada clone by Simmons as part of his twisted scheme.
Simmons made her into an Ada clone.
Okay, yeah, it's complicated. She attempts a final, desperate attack against the real Ada after injecting herself with a powerful C-virus dose, but she's finally killed. The real Ada then helps Leon and Helena in their ultimate fight against Simmons before destroying the laboratory where Carla was developed, making sure no more clones can be created. Then, she accepts a new assignment, disappearing into the shadows as only Ada Wong can.
So after all that global pandemonium, the personal sacrifices, the interconnected battles, what's the resolution for our main characters? Do they find any peace? Or is the fight against bioterrorism just endless?
Well, most find semblance of resolution, yeah. Though the fight itself certainly isn't over. Leon and Helena are cleared for duty. They expose Simmons played a critical role in stopping the immediate threat. Chris remains with the BSAA, now in command of a new squad. He seems to have overcome his profound guilt, found a renewed sense of purpose despite losing peers.
Good for Chris.
Sherry continues her vital work as a DSO agent, using her unique abilities and experience to combat bioterrorism. And Jake, well, his identity is concealed by the BSAA to protect him from lingering threats. He begins a new life combating bioterrorism in a developing country, sort of embracing his role as a protector, using his bloodline for good rather than evil. It's a complex, kind of bittersweet ending for a truly epic narrative.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How these individual journeys, filled with personal stakes, global ramifications, how they were designed to converge into one massive, intricate conspiracy. It's a huge undertaking to pull off. Clearly, they aimed for maximum scope, but that sheer complexity became both its strength and, well, for some, its weakness. The ambition was undeniable, but the execution, that's where opinions really diverged, didn't they?
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about how the game actually played, because this is where Resident Evil 6 made some incredibly bold choices, redefining movement and combat in ways that significantly altered the game's feel, pushing it firmly towards that action identity. What were some of the key new gameplay mechanics introduced? The ones that fundamentally changed how you interacted with the world?
They truly overhauled player mobility, and that was a direct response, I think, to the increasing popularity of more fluid action games at the time. Resident Evil 6 introduced the ability to roll in any direction, which was a huge departure from the more static, tank-like movement of older games.
Right, the tank controls were long gone by then, but this was another step.
Exactly. You could now run while shooting a first for the main series, giving players much more freedom and control in those frantic combat encounters. And you could even slide into cover or slide to dodge attacks. Critics like Games Radar specifically praised this emphasis on fluidity and movement. They noted it felt like a significant upgrade in player control compared to prior titles, making gunfights feel much more dynamic.
And how did these changes impact the overall gameplay experience? Did it make it feel more, well, more action-oriented, maybe less like a traditional Resident Evil game?
It absolutely did. These innovations directly transformed the gameplay feel, made it far more dynamic, far more action-focused than earlier entries. Combat became faster, more responsive, less about careful positioning and resource management, and more about constant movement and aggression. There was also a stamina bar for melee attacks, which encouraged players to get up close and personal, and a quick shot mechanic, allowing for instant, often one-hit headshots on standard zombies, which added to the rapid-fire, almost arcade-like nature of encounters.
Yeah, quick shots were powerful.
Very. So this begs the question, did these changes truly enhance the dynamic combat, or did they contribute to that feeling that the game was straying too far from its survival horror roots? For many, it was a clear sign. The franchise leaning heavily into its action identity, shifting the core gameplay loop from survive at all costs to fight your way through.
Beyond just movement, how did the characters themselves differ? In terms of abilities, maybe? And how was health management handled in this new, more action-heavy environment?
Yeah, Capcom made a concerted effort to differentiate the 4 playable characters, giving each of the central protagonists unique abilities to encourage distinct playstyles. For example, some might have faster reload times, others could carry more ammunition, or maybe be more resilient to damage. Their scenarios were designed to offer varying levels of vulnerability or resilience, which subtly encouraged players to adapt their approach based on who they were playing. Chris's campaign, for instance, felt much more like a straight-up military shooter because of his loadout and abilities.
Okay, and health. Less herbs, more action.
Well, you still used herbs, but the system involved consuming tablets, which you produced by mixing herbs. It was a familiar mechanic, but now streamlined for faster, on-the-go use, fitting the game's quicker pace. And a crucial co-op mechanic allowed a player who ran out of health a short window to defend themselves while their partners tried to revive them, really reinforcing that teamwork aspect.
Right, the dying state.
Exactly. And there was even a lone wolf ability, surprisingly. It allowed players to actually remove their AI companion, which signaled a design choice for varying levels of support, from full co-op to a more isolated, challenging experience if you wanted it.
Let's talk enemies. We know classic zombies made a welcome return for many, but there was also that significant new threat, the Javo. What made them distinct? And how did character progression work in this game?
The Javo were indeed a significant new addition, and a clear indicator of the game's action-oriented design. Unlike the traditional shambling zombies, Javo were designed to be far more intelligent and adaptable. They could interact with each other to plan rudimentary attacks, use weapons, take cover, even heal themselves.
Smarter enemies, then.
Much smarter. And critically, they could undergo various mutations based on where they were injured. For instance, shoot their arm, it might mutate into a giant shield. Shoot their leg, it might turn into this powerful, pouncing limb. This led to a total of 15 different types of Javo mutations that kept players on their toes, forcing them to adapt combat strategies mid-fight.
15 mutation types. Wow.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the introduction of Javo and the robust upgrade system reflects a clear move towards more adaptable and progression-focused combat encounters, moving away from simple horror encounters to more dynamic firefights.
And progression, how did that work?
Right, progression. Defeating enemies would cause them to drop skill points, which was a departure from previous games' fixed upgrades found in the world. Players collected these points and then spent them on a wide array of upgrades. These could range from increased weapon effectiveness, like boosting handgun damage or shotgun capacity, to specific ammunition drops, or even passive abilities like increased defense. Players could equip up to 3 of these upgrades at any given time. And importantly, they applied across all campaigns.
Across all of them.
Yeah, encouraging strategic customization and a sense of persistent growth throughout the entire game, regardless of which character you were playing. It meant you could tailor your experience more than ever before, lean into a run-and-gun style or something more conservative.
The multiplayer offerings in Resident Evil 6 were also pretty robust, weren't they?
Yeah.
Extending far beyond just the campaign co-op. What did that look like, and how did they try to innovate in that space?
It was quite expensive, yeah. Reflecting Capcom's desire to build a strong online community around the game. Beyond the core drop-in online co-op for the main campaigns, which allowed another player to join your session anytime, the game featured several dedicated multiplayer modes. There was the perennial Mercenaries mode, a fan favorite from previous entries.
Of Mercenaries.
Right, where players fight for survival against hordes of enemies under a strict time limit, aiming for high scores. The PC version even had an exclusive sub-mode called No Mercy, which uniquely featured characters from Valve's Left 4 Dead 2.
No way, the Left 4 Dead crew.
Yeah, facing an insane 300 enemies against a timer. It was a wild, over-the-top challenge that really pushed the game's action capability.
Okay, 600 enemies. Wow.
Then there was Agent Hunt mode, a truly innovative feature that got a lot of attention. After clearing the main campaigns, players could opt to invade other people's online sessions, taking control of random C-virus enemies.
You could play as the monsters.
Exactly. You'd actively hunt down the other human players, acting as a sentient bioweapon. The longer you stayed in their session, the more points you'd earn, adding this unique, asymmetrical multiplayer dynamic that hadn't really been seen in the series before. Kind of a cat-and-mouse game between players.
And they kept adding to that with downloadable content too, right? Even some surprising crossovers.
Yes, they further expanded the multiplayer options. Several DLC additions were released in December 2012, showing commitment to post-launch support. These included Predator mode, where players took turns as the fearsome, unkillable Ustanak, hunting down other human players, reversing the roles from the campaign.
Bang is Ustanak, nice.
Survivors was Resident Evil's take on a classic deathmatch mode, supporting up to 6 players, bringing a competitive edge to the combat. And Onslaught was a 2-player mode with a clever twist. Completing combo chains would send enemies over to your opponent's screen, creating this competitive horde experience where you try to overwhelm your rival.
That sounds chaotic.
And they even had that fascinating Left 4 Dead 2 crossover DLC for the PC version in April 2013, which was a genuine surprise. It added L4D2 characters and monsters to Mercenaries, No Mercy, and conversely, RE6 content was offered as optional skins for L4D2. It was a significant effort to build out the multiplayer ecosystem and keep players engaged, showcasing Capcom's intent to push the game as a major online title.
So we've talked about the immense ambition in terms of gameplay and narrative. Let's pull back the curtain now and look at the behind-the-scenes effort. Because Resident Evil 6 was, as you said, a production of unprecedented scale for Capcom. The development timeline itself is pretty fascinating, starting right after RE5.
It's true. The scale of this project was monumental right from the beginning. RE6 was conceptualized very soon after RE5 launched, building on its success. And by 2009, it had entered full development. Interestingly, RE5's producer Jun Takuchi had considered implementing a completely new system for RE6, hinting at early ideas for radical shifts, but he ultimately ruled out his direct involvement. In March 2009, co-producer Masachika Kawada even stated that a new installment hadn't been fully decided upon yet. But he admitted it could take Capcom 4 to 8 years to develop and would be drastically different from its predecessors. That foresight alone is incredible, given the eventual outcome. 4 to 8 years. They knew it was big.
Wow, drastically different. And 4 to 8 years is a huge statement, especially for a series with such a well-defined identity back then. How much of that early radical vision do you think actually persisted through such a massive development cycle? And how much was shaped by maybe external pressures?
That's a critical question, I think. It speaks to the heart of Resident Evil 6's identity crisis, really. The game was directed by Akira Sasaki, known for the Resident Evil Outbreak series, and produced by Yoshiaki Hirabayashi. They initially aimed for what they called ultimate horror entertainment, considering RE6 the flagship title of the horror genre.
Flagship horror title. Really?
That's what they said initially. They openly stated their goal was to balance all of the things people love about the series with brand new concepts, which suggests an initial commitment to horror, but perhaps a struggle to define what ultimate horror meant within an evolving action framework.
Right.
And they even tried to define different types of horror for each campaign, a clear attempt to cater to various fan desires, maybe. Leon's story was designed to reflect gothic, classic, Resident Evil-style horror, implying more atmosphere, maybe resource scarcity. Chris's campaign aimed for a horror of the battlefield, focusing on the terror of overwhelming numbers, the psychological toll of war. Jake's scenario was about the fear of being stalked, creating that persistent dread with Ustanak always after him. And Ada's story was pitched as a very classic Resident Evil-style experience, likely emphasizing puzzles and suspense.
So trying to be all things to all people.
Kind of looks that way, yeah. This varied approach was intended to offer something for everyone, but it also inadvertently spread the game's focus very thin.
But then came that critical turning point, that very public admission from Capcom in March 2012 that seemed to fundamentally change the game's direction, or at least how it was publicly framed.
Indeed. This was a pivotal moment, not just for RE6, but for the franchise's whole trajectory. Capcom stated they believed the survival horror market was too small for Resident Evil.
Wow, just outright said it.
Just said it. This wasn't just an offhand comment, it felt like a strategic pivot, leading to a deliberate decision to orient the gameplay primarily around the action genre. Lead developer Hiroyuki Kobayashi aimed to deliver the most impressive Resident Evil title ever, both in terms of scope and production values. And Capcom asserted the game was meant to evolve the series. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this decision was less about, neglecting established fans, and more about a calculated risk to broaden the series' appeal in a changing market. The success of action games like Call of Duty, even RE4 and 5, showed a wider audience was interested in intense shooting.
Makes business sense, maybe.
From a business perspective, yeah. But this pivot, though understandable, certainly had significant consequences for how the game was perceived by its traditional fan base.
Moving on to the settings and character decisions, which also saw new directions, but with some familiar faces returning, thankfully.
Yes. Director Sasaki had a strong wish to place a major part of the game in China, which became that sprawling, devastated city of Lanxiang, a vibrant but chaotic setting that allowed for these massive scale battles. And then there was Edonia, that fictional country given an Eastern European theme, but not modeled after any specific real-world place, providing a darker, colder backdrop for some opening acts.
And characters.
In terms of characters, it was Kobayashi's key decision to bring back Leon S. Kennedy and make him central to this story, which was a huge draw for fans, right? He hadn't been a primary protagonist since RE4.
Yeah, people love Leon.
And Jake Muller, the new character, was specifically designed, according to Famitsu, to be someone today's young people can empathize with, trying to inject a fresh perspective. And crucially, the decision to bring back zombies, the classic, shambling Resident Evil enemy, was a direct response to popular demand. Fan requests after their absence in RE4 and 5.
Fans wanted zombies back.
They really did. Producer Hirabayashi even admitted that the game radically changed by the end of development due to all the new concepts introduced, which highlights the constant evolution and maybe challenges faced by such a large team.
And how did Capcom try to build hype for this massive undertaking before launch? It sounds like there were quite a few twists and turns, even involving an unusual incident in Poland.
The promotional journey began with an official trailer in January 2012. Generated immense buzz, speculation. At E3 2012, Microsoft's press briefing featured the first major gameplay demo. showcasing Leon and Helena fighting zombies in China, giving players a taste of that new action gameplay. Playable demos were a big part of the strategy, allowing players to get hands-on, initially scheduled for September 5th, 2012, then pushed to September 18th. Interestingly, early access to this demo was bundled with another Capcom title, Dragon's Dogma. Clever cross-promotion.
Yeah, I remember that Dragon's Dogma demo bundle.
However, a very telling detail about the development feedback loop. Capcom actually brought a different version of the demo to the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con. They modified parts of its gameplay in direct response to criticism of the first demo.
Ah, so they were listening to feedback even then.
It indicated they were, yeah. Even if they couldn't drastically alter the core game that late. The game's release date itself was even pushed forward from November 20th to October 2nd, 2012, which typically implies confidence or maybe wanting to avoid the holiday rush. And then, yeah, that bizarre pre-launch incident, several copies of the game were actually stolen and sold early in Poland, creating an unexpected, if illegal, early launch for some fans. It was clear the anticipation was extremely high.
So we've seen the monumental ambition, the genre shifts, the detailed, sometimes turbulent development.
Yeah.
Now let's turn to the critical reception, which, as we mentioned, was heavily divided. Looking at the Metacritic scores, it tells a pretty clear story of mixed or average, a first for a main series RE title.
It certainly does. The Metacritic scores paint a consistent picture across platforms, hovering in that mixed or average range. 74 for PS3, 67 for Xbox 360, 69 for PC, then dropping slightly for the re-releases. 60 for PS4, 63 for Xbox One, 69 for Switch. What's particularly significant and really stands out in the series' history is that Metacritic specifically described it as the first game in the main series that failed to receive a positive reception from game critics. Yeah. The overarching criticisms often revolved around complaints about bloat and inconsistency, that there was just too much going on without a clear, cohesive vision. And there was also that pervasive feeling. Resident Evil 6 was more generic shooter than distinctive survival horror game, a direct consequence of Capcom's stated market strategy. This leads to an important question. How much of this critical response was due to inherent flaws in the game's ambitious design? And how much was due to a strong, perhaps unmovable expectation from critics about what a Resident Evil game should be?
That's a crucial distinction. Despite that overall critical consensus, there were definitely elements that garnered praise, weren't there? It wasn't uniformly negative, which points to the high production values Capcom poured into it.
Far from it, no. Critics often praised the game's technical prowess, demonstrating where that 600-person team excelled. Specifically, its graphics were frequently lauded for detail and scale, the AI noted for improvements, particularly companion behavior, and the responsiveness of its controls seen as a significant step forward for the series. Game Informer, for example, called it an unhinged, flaming roller coaster ride, highlighting the intense, over-the-top action and spectacle.
Yeah, roller coaster ride sounds about right.
Official Xbox magazine labeled it an accomplished shooter and a thunderous send-off for Resident Evil, also commending its sheer length and variety.
Okay.
IGN's Richard George was particularly favorable towards the technical and artistic design, stating the world, lighting, creature designs were incredibly strong, creating a dark, compelling atmosphere. Ryan McCaffrey of IGN also noted the new enemies, especially the Javo and their mutations, as some of the best designs in the franchise's history, praising their creativity and how they forced players to adapt.
Yeah, the Javo were visually interesting.
GamesRadar and 1UP.com both praised the control improvements, highlighting fluidity and movement. A welcome change for many. Though, it's worth noting, even with improved controls, some elements, like the cover system, were often criticized for not working reliably.
All right, the cover system was a bit sticky sometimes.
Yeah. Even The Escapist acknowledged the improved AI companion, stating it does a decent job of backing you up, a marked improvement from previous titles. So, while the overall reception was mixed, specific technical and design elements were genuinely appreciated, showed what the massive team could accomplish.
One of the most ambitious aspects, the structure around 4 distinct campaigns, also turned out to be one of the biggest points of contention among critics. How did that sprawling design, intended to be a strength, end up being a weakness for many reviewers?
The campaigns were indeed a double-edged sword. Their inconsistency became a major critical fault line. Eurogamer's Simon Parkin found Leon's campaign the strongest, citing it as the closest we get to the series' survival horror roots, noting its atmosphere, more deliberate pacing.
Okay, Leon's was the best.
For him, yeah. He also praised Ada's for its diverse flavor, highlighting her unique stealth and puzzle elements. However, Parkin was much more critical of the other two. stating Jake's campaign rarely delights due to repetitive boss encounters, often feeling like a constant chase, and dismissing Chris's as a second-rate third-person sprint with idiotic dialogue, which often veered into B-movie territory.
Idiotic dialogue. Harsh.
Yeah. Edge magazine echoed this, noting the noticeably contrasted in quality between the campaigns, suggesting that while ambition was admirable, execution was uneven. GameSpot described the entire multi-campaign structure as an ultimate test of patience, even for dedicated fans, feeling protracted rather than cohesive. While Destructoid went even further, calling RE6 not only a step back for the series, but also a step back for commonplace, unassuming action shooters in general, arguing it didn't even excel at the genre it was trying to imitate.
Wow, that's pretty damning.
It seems the ambition of multiple campaigns, while offering variety, ultimately led to a lack of consistent polish and focus across the entire experience for many critics.
Given all this criticism, especially from fans who felt the series was abandoning its roots, how did Capcom's executive producer, Hiroyuki Kobayashi, respond? He had a pretty interesting analogy, didn't he? Something about balancing innovation with tradition.
He did. And it's a very candid insight into the developer's perspective when facing such passionate feedback. Shortly after release, in an interview with the official PlayStation blog, Kobayashi addressed fan criticism directly. He famously likened fans and creators to two parents who are not always going to agree on what is best for raising that child.
Huh, interesting analogy.
What's fascinating here is that candid insight into the inherent tension. Evolving a long-standing franchise, the need to innovate versus the desire to satisfy established fan expectations, preserve core identity. He concluded by saying, "We do listen to the fans, but we can't be beholden to them at every turn, or I don't think we'll ever make progress in terms of the series development." It really highlights the challenge, the often thankless task, of balancing tradition with innovation in a beloved series. You can't please everyone. Sometimes you have to make bold decisions that will inevitably polarize the audience.
And finally, that brings us back to the core debate about the game's genre identity. Capcom dubbed RE6 dramatic horror, a term suggesting intense, narrative-driven fear. But critics seem to disagree quite strongly, firmly categorizing it otherwise.
Yes, despite Capcom's branding and their stated aim for ultimate horror entertainment, the overwhelming consensus among critics was the game had largely departed from the survival horror genre. It was, unequivocally for them, an action shooter. This stark departure became a defining characteristic of its reception and subsequent discussions. It fundamentally changed the core gameplay loop from manage resources and survive to shoot everything and move forward.
Right.
It's also incredibly telling to look at the franchise's trajectory post-RE6. Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, released in 2017, explicitly returned to survival horror roots, and even switched to first-person perspective, a huge, bold move.
Which was a massive shift back.
Exactly. This decision by Capcom directly, though maybe indirectly, underscored RE6's role as this experimental, pivotal, yet ultimately genre-shifting entry. It was a bold pivot that arguably informed the dramatic course correction that followed, showing that even massive commercial success couldn't completely offset the identity crisis.
Now, let's shift gears from critical reception to something equally, if not more, impactful for a game's long-term legacy. Its commercial performance. Capcom had some pretty high initial sales expectations for RE6, didn't they? Especially given that massive investment.
They certainly did, reflecting their ambition for it to be their biggest title yet. In May 2012, Capcom publicly announced they expected the game to sell a massive 7 million copies by the end of their 2012 fiscal year.
7 million.
Yeah, incredibly aggressive target, indicative of their confidence. However, this projection was later lowered to 6 million, a clear response to the mixed critical reception and early market signals. Despite the revised target, Capcom initially shipped an impressive 4.5 million copies worldwide, which at the time set a new record for the company in terms of initial shipment volume, showing immense retail confidence and pre-order momentum. In October 2012, the game sold 806,000 copies in the US alone, a very strong first month.
Okay, strong start.
But Capcom later acknowledged that sales weakened after that strong initial start, leading them to admit the game wouldn't meet their adjusted sales goals, and consequently, they had to lower their financial projections for that fiscal year.
So a huge initial shipment riding on the back of the Resident Evil name,
Right.
And it's massive marketing, but then the momentum just wasn't there. This begs the question, what factors often contribute to a strong initial shipment, but then weaker sales? Suggests something changed after launch.
That's a critical point in the life cycle of any major game release. Strong initial shipment often points to immense pre-launch hype, aggressive marketing, strong brand presence, ensuring retailers stock heavily. But subsequent weaker sales can be influenced by, well, a multitude of factors. Early mixed reviews can quickly dampen consumer enthusiasm. Word of mouth from initial players, if predominantly negative or polarizing, can spread rapidly online. Even intense competition in the market at the time can play a role. Other titles drawing attention and sales away. What's even more fascinating, and quite rare for a company like Capcom, is their own internal explanation. In February 2013, the company released a public statement attributing the game's poorer sales performance not just to external market factors, but to various development challenges, and quite tellingly, inadequate organizational collaboration across the company.
Inadequate organizational collaboration is. Wow, that's quite specific and revealing for a major publisher to make publicly. What do you think that might imply for a project of this size? Over 600 people working on it.
What's fascinating here is the sheer rarity of a company publicly acknowledging internal struggles like that. For a project as massive as RE6, over 600 developers potentially spread across multiple teams, even studios. Inadequate organizational collaboration could suggest a multitude of issues. It might point to a lack of clear, unified creative vision or conflicting directions between different teams working on separate campaigns or systems.
Like the different horror styles maybe not meshing.
Could be. It could imply communication breakdowns, insufficient integration of different elements, maybe even political infighting during development. Such internal disunity could very well manifest as the bloat and inconsistency critics highlighted in the final product. Imagine trying to make 4 distinct but interconnected games simultaneously while dealing with internal friction. It's a recipe for unevenness. This kind of internal challenge could certainly affect the game's overall cohesiveness and market reception beyond the initial hype, leading to players feeling a lack of polish or a confused identity. It paints a picture of a challenging, potentially fractured development.
Despite those initial sales hurdles, mixed critical reception, and even internal challenges, Resident Evil 6 has actually achieved remarkable long-term success, solidifying its place as one of Capcom's best-selling games over time. It's truly a testament to brand power and maybe enduring appeal somehow.
It absolutely has, and it's quite a story of perseverance. By March 2013, despite the initial wobbles, it had sold 4.9 million units. By October 2013, that number grew to 5.2 million worldwide, already making it one of Capcom's best-selling games at that time. But the true testament to its long-term endurance comes with the re-releases. The original PS3 and Xbox 360 versions alone sold a remarkable 8.9 million units.
Almost 9 million just on original console.
Yeah. Add to that an additional 3.5 million units sold for the PS4 and Xbox One re-releases by December 2023. And another 1.4 million for the Nintendo Switch by September 2024. If we connect this to the bigger picture, despite its divisive reception and initial sales hurdles, RE6 has, over time, accumulated a staggering combined total of 13.8 million units sold as of September 2024.
13.8 million.
Making it Capcom's 7th best-selling game of all time. This truly challenges the conventional wisdom that critical acclaim directly correlates with long-term commercial success. It's a powerful example of a game finding and retaining its audience, and achieving massive commercial impact over an extended period despite that initial polarizing reception.
Beyond the sheer sales figures, Resident Evil 6 also managed to garner some significant industry recognition and accolades, didn't it? Even if the critics were divided, other aspects of its production were clearly top tier.
It did indeed, highlighting the underlying quality in specific areas that often goes unnoticed amidst broader criticisms. It received an award for excellence at the Japan Game Awards 2013, acknowledging its overall quality and impact in Japan. Crucially, it also won the Best Sound Editing, Computer Interactive Entertainment at the 2013 Golden Reel Awards, an award from the Motion Picture Sound Editors, which is a major recognition.
Sound editing, okay.
And it was nominated for Best Original Score Video Game at the Hollywood Music and Media Awards. These awards, particularly in areas like sound design and score, highlight the game's underlying production quality and technical strengths. Even in a title that was otherwise so critically polarizing, it suggests that while the overall package might have been divisive, certain individual components of its creation were undeniably top tier, contributing significantly to the player experience, even if the core gameplay loop didn't resonate with everyone.
So what does this all mean for Resident Evil 6? Its complex, enduring place in the vast landscape of video game history.
It means Resident Evil 6 stands as this fascinating, almost paradoxical case study. In-game development and franchise evolution, it was an epic undertaking, born from unprecedented ambition and scale. It attempted to weave this sprawling narrative connecting fan-favorite characters across a global bio-threat, showcasing impressive technical achievements in graphics, AI, controls. Yet, through its bold genre shifts towards action, and perhaps its internal development challenges, it fundamentally divided its audience, challenged the very identity of a beloved series.
It's truly a paradox, isn't it? A game that was simultaneously a commercial powerhouse and a critical lightning rod. A game that both satisfied and alienated its fan base, and yet ultimately found its place.
Exactly. It reiterates that idea of a constant tension between creative vision, market demands, and established fan expectations within long-running franchises. This raises an important question. In the pursuit of evolution, when does a creative work truly find new ground and appeal to new audiences? And when does it risk alienating the core audience that defined its success in the first place? And who ultimately gets to decide a game's legacy? The critics, the initial sales, or its enduring presence in players' libraries years later?
It's a question developers across all forms of entertainment grapple with, I think. As you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider, does a game's immediate critical reception truly define its ultimate impact? Or can long-term sales and its role as a pivotal, experimental, and ultimately top-selling moment in a franchise's journey tell a more complete and perhaps more surprising story? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging for those nuggets of knowledge.